My parents sold my mountain cabin for my sister's wedding. Then my father laughed and said, "Consider it our gift." I told them to check their mail. What they didn't know was that I wasn't just the quiet son they had always dismissed. I was a software architect earning $160,000 annually with professional connections spanning the legal and financial sectors. And their gift was about to become the most expensive lesson in property law they'd ever receive. The mountain cabin wasn't just a weekend retreat. It represented 3 years of saving, working overtime, and sacrificing vacations to build something entirely mine. Every mortgage payment, every improvement, every repair came from my earnings at TechFlow Solutions, where I led a team of 12 developers. I'd bought the property outright after receiving an $80,000 bonus for developing their core logistics platform. But to my parents, Robert and Linda, I was still the compliant middle child who never caused problems. My sister Chloe had always been their golden child, the one who got piano lessons, designer clothes, and a brand new car for her 16th birthday. When she announced her engagement to Brandon, their response was predictable. Spare no expense for the wedding of the century. The engagement dinner should have warned me. My father raised his glass, beaming with pride. "Brandon, you're getting a princess, and Chloe deserves nothing less than a fairy tale wedding." He turned to me with that familiar expectant smile. "You'll help however you can, won't you, son?" I nodded politely, though something cold settled in my stomach. In my family, helping Chloe always meant sacrificing something of my own. When she wanted to join an expensive sorority, I gave up my study abroad program so they could afford her fees. When she crashed her car, I co-signed the loan for her replacement. The pattern was established. My achievements were family resources. But the cabin was different. It sat on 40 acres in the Blue Ridge Mountains, with a view that took your breath away every sunrise. I'd furnished it with hand-selected pieces, installed a stone fireplace myself, and even built the deck that wrapped around 3 sides. It was my sanctuary, the place where I recharged after 100-hour weeks during product launches. I should have seen it coming when my mother casually mentioned that wedding venues were surprisingly expensive and that they were exploring creative financing options. My father's joke at dinner sent a chill through me. "Don't worry, we won't sell your cabin to pay for the band." But I laughed along, assuming it was just his crude humor. 3 weeks later, I drove up to the cabin for a weekend of hiking and coding. Instead, I found a moving truck in my driveway and strangers carrying furniture through my front door. My hands shook as I approached the bearded man supervising the move. "Excuse me, what's going on here?" He consulted his clipboard. "Moving day. The Hendersons bought this place last week. Nice folks, cash buyers." My world tilted. Cash buyers? Who sold it to them? Robert and Linda Parker handled everything. Said their son had moved on, didn't need the place anymore. He shrugged sympathetically. "Sorry, buddy. Family stuff's always complicated." I called my father immediately. He answered with his usual authoritative tone, but I could hear celebration in the background, Chloe's laughter, the clink of champagne glasses. "Dad, what the hell is happening at my cabin? There are strangers moving into my house." A pause, then, matter-of-factly. "We sold it. The money was needed for Chloe's wedding. You understand how important this is to her." "You sold my property without telling me?" My voice cracked with disbelief. "Stop being dramatic. Families make sacrifices. Your sister deserves the wedding she's always dreamed of. We just moved some assets around." "Assets. My home was an asset to be moved around." "That was my cabin, Dad. My money, my deed. You had no right." His voice hardened. "You should be proud. Your hard work is helping your sister start her marriage in style. Consider it our gift to her, a gift from all of us." I drove straight to their house, finding the family celebrating in the living room. Chloe was draped across the couch in a silk robe, wedding magazines scattered around her. My mother was on the phone with caterers, discussing imported orchids. My father sat behind his desk like a king surveying his domain. "Did Dad tell you the amazing news?" Chloe looked up with that practiced smile. "We found the perfect venue. Brandon's parents are going to be so impressed." "With my money," I said quietly. She waved dismissively. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. You hardly even use that place. I'll get way more joy from one perfect wedding day than you ever got from that cabin." My mother covered the phone. Sweetie, this is bringing our family together. Isn't Chloe's happiness worth more than a cabin you only visited once a month? It was my home, I said, looking each of them in the eye. And her happiness isn't mine to pay for. My father stood, his expression shifting to the stern authority I'd feared as a child. That's enough. What's done is done. The cabin was a family asset, and we used it for the family's benefit. End of discussion. They actually looked proud of themselves. Chloe beamed like she'd won a prize. My mother nodded approvingly. My father sat back down, dismissing me with a wave. That night, I realized something had fundamentally shifted. They'd pushed me past the point where quiet compliance was possible. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to absorb their decision and move on. I was going to fight back. But I wouldn't do it their way, with shouting and emotional appeals. I'd do it my way, methodically, strategically, and with the full weight of the legal system behind me. They'd forgotten that their quiet son was also a successful professional with resources they'd never bothered to understand. The next morning, I called David Lawson, a real estate attorney I'd worked with when buying the cabin. David had helped TechFlow negotiate several property deals and had become something of a friend over the years. When I explained the situation, his response was immediate and reassuring. They sold property without the owner's consent. That's fraud, plain and simple. Do you have your original deed? Every document is in my possession. Then we can reverse this. The sale is invalid. Depending on how they forged your signature or claimed authority, there could be criminal charges. His voice carried the confidence of someone who'd handled these situations before. Your parents just committed a felony. We met that afternoon in his downtown office. David spread my documents across his conference table. The original deed, mortgage records, tax payments, utility bills, everything proving my sole ownership. He shook his head as he reviewed each page. This is ironclad. They had absolutely no legal right to sell your property. The buyers will get their money back, but your parents will be liable for all costs, legal fees, and potential penalties. He looked up with a slight smile. They really didn't think this through, did they? They thought I'd just accept it, like always. Well, they're about to learn otherwise. I'll file an emergency injunction tomorrow morning. The sale will be frozen immediately, and we'll begin criminal proceedings for fraud. Over the next week, while my family continued their wedding preparations, I worked with David to build an airtight case. We documented everything: the unauthorized sale, the forged documents claiming I'd agreed to transfer ownership, and the fraudulent statements my parents had made to the buyers. But David suggested we add another layer of consequences. Your parents used fraudulent proceeds to pay wedding vendors. We can freeze those payments, forcing them to personally cover costs they've already committed to. The venue, caterers, photographers, they'll all want immediate payment when the fraud comes to light. The wedding was scheduled to cost $200,000. My parents had used $150,000 from the cabin sale, planning to cover the difference with savings and credit cards. When that $150,000 disappeared, they'd be forced to find replacement funds immediately, or lose every vendor they had hired. But I wanted one more element: perfect timing. Instead of stopping the wedding early, we'd let them get to the ceremony itself. In front of all their friends, family, and Brandon's well-connected parents, the truth would be revealed in the most public, humiliating way possible. David coordinated with the sheriff's department to serve papers at the wedding venue. The charges would be filed that morning, funds frozen by afternoon, and the legal documents delivered just as the ceremony was supposed to begin. Every guest would witness the collapse of their perfect facade. 2 weeks before the wedding, Chloe cornered me at the rehearsal dinner. "You've been so quiet lately. Still sulking about the cabin?" I smiled calmly. "Don't worry, everything will work out perfectly. You'll see." She laughed, rolling her eyes. "You're so dramatic, but I'm glad you're finally accepting reality. This wedding is going to be incredible." My parents beamed at her words, proud of how they'd handled their difficult son. They had no idea that in 14 days, their world would collapse in the most public way possible. The morning of the wedding, I woke to my phone buzzing with a text from David. "Papers filed, funds frozen. Sheriff's Department will serve at 2 p.m. just before ceremony starts. This is going to be spectacular." I dressed carefully in my best suit and drove to the luxury hotel where $200,000 had transformed the ballroom into something resembling a royal wedding. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above tables draped in imported silk. Towers of white roses lined the aisle. A string quartet played classical music while guests in designer clothes sipped champagne. My parents moved through the crowd like celebrities. My father shook hands with business associates, boasting about the imported wine and five-course dinner. My mother posed for photos with relatives, making sure everyone saw the elaborate floral arrangements. Chloe glided across the room in her $8,000 dress, accepting congratulations like a queen holding court. I stood near the back, watching the spectacle, knowing that in 30 minutes, everything would change. At exactly 2 p.m., as guests were taking their seats for the ceremony, 3 sheriff's deputies entered the ballroom. The lead officer approached my parents with official documents, his voice carrying clearly in the suddenly quiet room. "Robert and Linda Parker, you're being served with papers for property fraud and theft charges. The funds you used for this event have been frozen pending investigation." My father's face drained of color as he read the documents. My mother's hands trembled as she tried to process the words. Chloe's shriek cut through the classical music. "What is this? What do you mean the money is frozen? What do you mean fraud charges?" The officer continued professionally. "A complaint has been filed regarding the unauthorized sale of property belonging to your son. The $150,000 you obtained from this sale is being held as evidence of fraud." Every guest in that ballroom heard every word. Brandon's parents leaned forward with horror. His father, a prominent businessman, immediately understood the implications. Extended family members whispered furiously. Several guests pulled out phones to record the unfolding drama. I stepped forward, my voice calm and steady. "It means they stole my property and used the money to pay for this wedding. The cabin they sold was mine. My deed, my money, my home. They forged documents and committed fraud." My father slammed his fist on the nearest table, causing champagne glasses to rattle. "You went behind our backs. You're destroying your sister's wedding." "No, Dad," I replied without raising my voice. "You destroyed it when you decided stealing from me was acceptable. I'm just making sure there are consequences." The sheriff's deputy handed additional papers to my parents. "You're also being billed for the buyer's legal fees, moving costs, and damages. Total estimated at $45,000, due immediately." Brandon's mother stood abruptly, her face pale with shock. "Is this true? You funded this wedding with stolen money?" Chloe turned desperately to Brandon, mascara streaming down her cheeks. "This doesn't change anything between us, right? We can still get married. This is just a misunderstanding." Brandon's expression said everything. His jaw was tight, his eyes cold with disgust. After a long moment, he shook his head slowly. "This changes everything. My family won't be associated with fraud and theft. If this is what marriage into your family looks like, I can't do it." He removed his boutonniere, placed it on the altar, and walked toward the exit. His parents followed immediately, not looking back. The entire wedding party, groomsmen, bridesmaids, flower girls, stood frozen in shock as the groom disappeared. Chloe collapsed into her $8,000 dress, sobbing hysterically. My mother rushed to comfort her, but the damage was beyond repair. My father stood rigid, his carefully constructed authority shattered in front of everyone he'd wanted to impress. Guests began filing out, some stopping to offer awkward condolences, others simply fleeing the scene. The string quartet packed up their instruments. Photographers put away their cameras. The $200,000 fairy tale had become a $200,000 nightmare. I approached my parents one final time. "The cabin is back in my name as of this morning. The sale has been reversed. You'll need to find $150,000 to repay the buyers, plus legal fees and court costs. The wedding vendors will expect immediate payment since the fraudulent funds are frozen." My father's voice was barely a whisper. "You've destroyed this family." "No," I replied calmly. "I've just stopped letting you destroy me. There's a difference." I left the ballroom quietly, stepping into the crisp mountain air. Behind me, the sound of my sister's sobs and my parents' frantic phone calls to lawyers faded into silence. The fallout was immediate and severe. Brandon's family not only canceled the wedding, but demanded reimbursement for their contributions to the rehearsal dinner and bachelor party. Another $15,000 my parents didn't have. Word spread quickly through their social circle. Friends stopped returning calls. Business associates distanced themselves. My father's reputation as a respected community leader evaporated overnight. Chloe's humiliation was complete. She'd been left at the altar in front of 200 witnesses, the story spreading through social media within hours. Brandon blocked her on all platforms and instructed his lawyer to handle any communication. She moved back into my parents' house, deeply depressed and financially dependent on the same parents who'd caused her downfall. The financial impact was devastating. With the fraudulent $150,000 frozen and legal fees mounting, my parents drained their savings and maxed out credit cards trying to cover wedding costs they had already committed to. The venue demanded payment. The caterers threatened lawsuits. The photographer kept their $5,000 deposit for the canceled shoot. 6 months later, my parents sold their house to cover legal debts and moved into a small apartment across town. My father took a part-time job at a hardware store. His business contacts had evaporated along with his reputation. My mother stopped attending church, too embarrassed to face people who'd witnessed their family's spectacular collapse. Chloe attempted to restart her life in another city, but Brandon's rejection had shattered her confidence. She took a retail job and lived in a studio apartment. The princess lifestyle she'd always known, now just a memory. Meanwhile, I reclaimed my mountain cabin and had the locks changed. Standing on that deck again, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Complete peace. Not because I'd destroyed my family, but because I'd finally established boundaries they couldn't cross. The quiet son they'd dismissed was gone forever. In his place stood someone who understood his own worth and wouldn't accept being treated as disposable. They'd thought my property was their gift to give away. Instead, I'd given them the most valuable gift possible, the knowledge that actions have consequences, and some people will fight back when pushed too far. My mountain cabin still stands today, more beautiful than ever after the renovations I completed with my next bonus. Sometimes I think about that wedding day, how $200,000 and 3 years of planning disappeared in 30 minutes because my parents forgot one simple truth. What belongs to me is mine to keep.